Chill here with siriustalesmoon. This is Jupiter hour, and Sol day turns into Jupiter night. The ascendant is conjoining Procyon, with Jupiter retrograde in 20 degrees Cancer. The moon is applying to oppose Pluto from Leo, and this is a great time to think about Moon Leo and Moon Neptune. If Moon Neptune combinations have to do with being with the void, what is missing relationally, emotionally, and manifesting, and even miraculous healing. And Moon Pluto has to do with of power and relation. And so how nourishment, care, and power and control operate. But Pluto can also be a taboo that is born around oscillation of power, being in power or helpless, grieving, being a magnet or a repellent. And that can have to do with relation. So I'm going to give energy reading, and it's way more general than personal. It may resonate with different people, but I think we can all resonate in one way or another. And this is basically Pluto tends to a secret that is birthing truth, a compost that turns into nourishing soil. And Pluto is also cell regeneration. So the birth process, and with the moon, it can be very literal. How was the birthing process creating, standing in one's power, or, okay, or needing to compensate and use power and care as control, or fearing to lose control in the face of issues to do with the moon, that is emotions, relations, feelings, eyesight. Okay, Moon in Leo is very creative. It can be feeling feelings and painting them. Okay, the colors of emotions, for example, can be very Moon Leo. But in general, the Moon Pluto is where we can be feeling in the power of someone else emotionally, or the other way around, or somebody could feel that way about us. And for example, Pluto going over the moon or opposing the moon goes into the essence of relations, the most taboo topics to do with relations. With the basically the intent is to go into the core of something, regenerate and rebirth in a way that the soil is nourished and nourishing, in a way that something can grow there. So the energy I'm getting is that there is somebody or certain people that very visibly see eclipses. They can look at a source of light or something, or even a flower that looks, I don't know, yellow flowers that either are sunflowers or even the calendula that I've been looking at. And they can look at a source of light, and if it is in the vicinity of eclipses, they could have the nodes on sun and or moon. But it could be eclipse child or both. And for them, it seems to be that they would see eclipse and they would want to show, they would want to deliver a message that the eclipse has to do with something. For example, before I was moving from the previous place, I saw the city lights and I saw them like eclipsing. And there was a particular family, a particular lineage that was associated with that. And it was as if somebody from that lineage was showing me that there's going to be eclipse around that city. Um, and the other time I was going through the shopping center and basically taking the bus, and I was seeing again city lights and again those eclipses. And in the lunar eclipse, I was actually seeing the moon, and I was at the bus station. It was not in the same location, but that was something fascinating. And then yesterday I was picking up calendulas, and in my dream, I was shown the calendulas, the open flowers, and that they were looking at eclipses. So there's something eclipsing related to whether it's, I don't know, maybe it's me doing the salves or the creams from calendula, or the city itself, or the herbs themselves, like many things that can relate, but they were trying to show me what the city eclipse is about. Now, whether or not they're trying to work with the eclipses in a certain way is open-ended question, because some do worship, let's say, the black sun, or people that are born around eclipses may have times where they try to work with that energy or control that energy, and it can even be fated. Like it's as terrible as it sounds, because occultism is not advised to do magic around eclipses. And again, some people have, it's just very volatile energy that anyway is incredibly powerful and anyway has fated changes. And if I think about eclipses as fated changing the way we see things, then the raison d'etre for doing the magical work might be unclear because we don't yet see what will the eclipse bring. So let's say, for example, let's say I want to manifest a house, okay? But I'm scheduled to travel, meet the love of my life, have children, and okay, yes. And then if I do magical work or around, before around eclipse, and I say, okay, I manifest a house, um, it might go in a very weird way where there would be power to my timeline, but it would be very disturbed because the eclipse was like, hey, that person is supposed to go there. There is where their heart is. And that person is trying to manifest a house where they should be traveling. So, for example, I may find myself in a very disturbed way traveling because I need to move a house, and that could generate a timeline that is excessive to the timeline of the eclipse. For example, maybe the eclipse was supposed to bring a situation where there's a certain ending to a certain living condition, and it is because a traveling is scheduled. But if I was trying to work with the energy of the eclipse to manifest a house, it would create excess timeline of manifesting a house where the eclipse is actually supposed to bring me what the essence of what I want, which is, for example, to feel at home. And that might necessitate and another participant in that home, and that participant is actually over there, and so the eclipse was kind of supposed to arrange that, and this can be both why manifesting with eclipses, how should I say that? Does it create excess trouble? I don't know. Okay, but it can definitely create a situation where one was manifesting a home, and then they actually, I don't know, lose their home, but find love. And then they feel at home with the love. And so that is um, something that is coming up. And another thing that came up is the topic of relation, and how leaning into the relation that is emotionally nourishing for us, um, or even tending to and manifesting what is actually emotionally nourishing for us, um, beginning to confront that, as the moon is opposing Pluto, so confront the way that that is being used, and that has to do with also Moon trine Neptune, our authentic erotic nature. So beginning to dissolve the relational trauma that affects our authentic erotic nature. Okay, for example, sexuality, sometimes where we see all the weird things that happen to us accumulating there and affecting our ability to relate, or um, and so there's a psychosexual component. Usually malachite comes up when I talk about psychological and sexuality and relation. And the solution or the manifestation might be there. Okay? Moon trine Neptune tells us that we're not imagining, that we are, that there is an agreement between the safety and the relation of the moon and Neptune. Even if something is, let's say, an illusion or a dream, that dream serves meeting our emotional needs, and that in return makes us less susceptible to being extorted by those emotional needs. Okay? Remember that a love that is actually loving is never dishonoring in spirit and in matter. Now, when it comes to eroticism, relation brings to the surface the taboos that may affect safe relation. Okay? The ability to relax into, and the ability to provide, not as means of control. Issues of Moon and Pluto, hard aspects can also be at the heart of where people are still, through a crisis, tending to something at the core issue of the relation, of their own relational pattern, so that they can emerge into safe relations, whether together or apart. More things to say about that. Um, this, in various ways, those topics and issues, and the emotional purging that comes with them, but also the emotional nourishment and absorption of emotional nourishment that come with this, may be at the heart of discovering not just our relational nature, but what is missing. We might have a eureka with the moon sextiling, still separating from a sextile to Uranus. We might have a eureka. What is missing in our relational style? And we might even curate that or meet that miraculously or suddenly. And so, let's say somebody is really chasing someone, they really care about them, they care for them to feel loved, they really wanted, they really cater to what they see as their emotional needs, that other person only partially feels that or doesn't really feel that. And then when that person connects with their emotional nature, instead of coming closer to the person that cater for their needs, they are actually finding that what they need is elsewhere. And that person that constantly cater to their emotional needs wants to be catered to, because from their perspective they have been giving care and expecting to receive care, but the other person didn't sense that care, and when they finally meet that, they meet it elsewhere, and they couldn't provide for the care that that other person needs. And so it becomes an awareness that, hey, there maybe have been two people that needed to tend to their inner child and meet their needs separately. And the attempts to try to work in a way that, hey, I will give emotions to you and you will give emotional care for me, is not false in logic, but because of the different developments, different traumas, different timelines, there may be a challenge around meeting those needs in timelines that are compatible for both, depending on the relation. And then there can be a eureka where that is actually becoming a reality, okay? That there is actually where either the moons are compatible, again, moon nakshatras, okay? Either the moons are compatible, or simply it's a timeline where one provides what the other is missing. And that is more important than commitment, long-term relationships, okay? And many other things. On level of eroticism, emotions are so important. And particularly we talk about Neptune. Moon trine Neptune is a great time to talk about how the holistic view of eroticism is also emotional, and meeting our emotional, erotic, and non-erotic needs. Um, it can be whether somebody likes to provide provide emotionally, and that can be even whether they met their non-erotic needs, and after they did, they can interchangeably provide and be the recipient more easily. But it's also on whether they like to have somebody completely relaxing into them, or they need to completely relax into someone. And that can absolutely be interchangeably, but where is the, how should I say that? The road there might be different for different people. And the purging is also of the economy, the world, the politics, anything that keeps them from being able to experience that relation safely, sanely, and so on. Okay? Particularly when I talk about both erotic and non-erotic. And again, some people are meant to, how should I say, for example, let's say before gay marriage, there were couples that were happily gay married, and then they revolutionized and gay marriage became a thing, and then they drew apart because there were other missing things emotionally, relationally, in terms of embodiment, that were not there, or that they had to meet separately. So this is a good example where, yes, where certain things, okay, and then certain things take precedence over certain other things. Um, and of course, different people go through the crisis of eroticism in different timelines, um, or even like, how should I say that? It resonates with whom it resonates. Um, but the people that do go through the crisis of eroticism, namely what is missing in their emotional, erotic, and non-erotic life, um, they are, and again, Neptune and Pluto, the good thing about this sextile is that we can tend to the authentic self, the taboo self, what is missing. And sometimes, people that, for example, have very weird fantasies that they're afraid to explore even with themselves, or feeling shame around fantasy, they might be scheduled to look deeper into the fantasy, let go into, let's say, self-pleasure on the fantasy, while meeting their non-erotic needs as well, and finding what's underneath. And other people might be in a different timeline where they did that and meeting their non-erotic needs, and they're like, okay, there's something I want to relax into that's completely not those things, and the world needs to change to accommodate. Okay, ingresses of Neptune to different signs are also ingresses in eroticism, the mystery, and the discovery. It's not just drugs and mafia. Okay, and what do drugs and mafia try to provide? They try to provide a sense of belonging and the approximate of basically love, um, releasing inhibition and shame. And they work on the void, so they create the laws that people will feel the void and then would turn to drugs, would turn to alcohol, would turn to even healing, channeling, um, addictions, and so on and so forth. Um, Neptune is also how the dream state is sometimes used as diversion tactic, where it contains the desire to really let go into bliss, which is a basis of human existence. Again, different people, it may resonate them with different. Um, this is also the healing nature of bliss, okay, and blissful states. And the question is, what is real and what is imaginary, but also with Neptune, the absorption of the experience of bliss as a vehicle for self regeneration. Okay? For example, if you think about amphetamines, when I was working on my thesis proposal, um, I took prescribed amphetamines, and instead of what they're supposed to do, or in addition to what they're supposed to do, which is to help me concentrate, I noticed that I was able to begin to process traumas better, and I basically um, use them to process trauma, and it's also probably why I was able to release amphetamines where other people are not. I still needed to complement magnesium, and it does cause sleepless nights, so I want to prescribe that to anyone necessarily, but the way and the intent behind, and the way that in the setting that I created for myself for the use of amphetamines, for example, to fix my room, or to process things that were emotionally difficult to process, or to make conversations that were difficult for me to make. Um, And that, for example, when I took my first course of aromatherapy, we had an exam, and I was wondering, should I take Concerta or not? I actually don't remember if I took Concerta, and it's not impossible and even very likely that I said, okay, I'm going to take my amphetamines to pass the test of, how to treat with essential oils. So I'm saying that because the setting is very important. I'm not saying, hey, go take really, psychedelic drugs, create the settings, and it will just be fine. No, not at all. But I also acknowledge the dual nature of Neptune, where other people got, let's say, addicted or used amphetamines to run away. I used amphetamines to face directly, process, and create the emotional setting for healing. Um, would I prefer to not use amphetamines? Absolutely. Do I use amphetamines today? Absolutely not. Am I satisfied with essential oils? Yes, definitely. The thing that helped me that changed the direction was really tending to what is true to me, what makes me happy, what was missing in my academic life, um, that the amphetamines created an aura of a high around, but what was missing in my life that these prescribed drugs answered to in order to release from that. Um, and this is also the question of eroticism and drugs. Um, okay, on the relation of eroticism and drugs. I remember a time where I would try to explore self pleasure with amphetamines because I wasn't able to concentrate even to do that. And that was something where I noticed that it was an approximate, it was not really the authentic of my erotic nature. And while these topics are really taboo, I think that it's an important discussion because those discussions, where they're not made, then patient sovereignty is not addressed, and then patients even don't recover because that's a taboo to talk about. Okay, a lot of drugs that are used, whether to prescribe for relaxation or sleep, that can harm. But sometimes we also have to take a look at the big picture. For example, um, if people have certain type of pattern that they need to evolve from, Pluto is evolving in eroticism, then having a period where they're not being in their erotic self can help break the pattern as long as they don't use that to escape or to have as a permanent escape. Um, to others is really important because there can be, Neptune is eroticism and Neptune is addiction, and that can be because of a certain emotional void or grief, but also trauma. Um, I don't remember who talked about this on YouTube, but there were experiments that were exposing children to certain very violent sexual acts, and these children became addicted on being perpetrators. There's, of course, the orgasm on dopamine, which is highly addictive, and they became actual perpetrators. So that's something um, that's also okay to be considered, the erotic and the non-erotic relation, and so on. Um, so Neptune Aries is going to be a big issue of self-administered drugs, and patient sovereignty. So basically, patients would really need to rely on themselves. Karen and Eris began to prepare us for that. A lot of us have had experiments done on us, but also experiences done on us non-volitionally, of course, which is crimes against humanity. But then, and a lot of us had experiences where we may have sought therapy or sought consultation, and we had to really assert our sovereignty in the face of the consultation or the therapists. Okay, and by the way, both holistic, it can even be astrology, um, modalistic, um, and conventional. This is why the said patient sovereignty is so important, and um, uh, and with Neptune, a lot of patients will have to assert. It's not about, oh, nobody is coming to save you. It's about Aries is a frontier, is a first frontier, and so while definitely certain people are coming to save, because Neptune Aries, for example, is a army medical person or army doctor. So it's it is about saving, and saving lives. That being said, in those first frontiers, the patient sometimes has to surrender whether they're going to be saved or not, and there's going to be an issue of patient sovereignty where sometimes the doctors don't know, okay, because it's a first frontier. Um, in fact, psychiatry is an eternal first frontier, and actually the fact that the psychiatrists don't know allowed patient sovereignty in the sense that the patient would have to either try different drugs and see, or different combinations of therapy and see what works for them. So this is something um, that allowed, that in certain stages even encouraged people to learn about their medical conditions and basically see what works for them. Okay? Of course, in the case that it was not weaponized, and unfortunately, weaponized medicine is an issue with any Mars sign Neptune. Whether it was the Neptune Scorpio that we had since basically the mid 50s into all the way into the end of the 60s. So, and this was weaponized um, psychiatry and psychology, and weaponized sex therapy. Um, so, Neptune Aries, the weaponization is mainly around identity, sovereignty, um, having people surrendering their sovereignty, any type of apotropsy issues. All those issues are going to be extensively addressed with Neptune in sign of Aries. And of course, the use of medicine or medical weapon at war, as well as the frontiers for medicine that are created at war. Okay, a lot of people are looking to wartime because this is the frontiers where many things are ethical that are not. And I'm not talking about, oh, it's possible to rape without implications. Well, the implication is most veterans are homeless with CPTSD, not PTSD, CPTSD. Okay, and until we don't discuss ritual abuse, where people had to be victims and perpetrators, basically it's only the ritual abuse survivors that began to create a frontier for the veterans to heal, because they could talk about PTSD, then it helped some rape victims, but then they tried to separate war trauma because they were also the rapists, and to address that, we would already be addressing ritual abuse because that's what happened to them in the military. So addressing ritual abuse is creating a release of the first frontier that was isolated from the chance to recovery. Um, Now, of course, all these things, people that had to do crime to live, to have a home, to this, to that, um, of course, that affects eroticism relation, but also they can be an outer planet in aspect to the moon, or to, okay, Neptune squared my Chiron in 2012. Hmm. Right now it's squaring the Cancer Chirons. I'm going to have to meditate on that. Um, Square again is a crisis of healing. There is healing, but it comes with a crisis. Um, for example, with Chiron Cancer, what could be having a wound around, let's say, the infanthood, or for me it was in Mercury, so it was pre-linguistic stage, language development, and and with Cancer, it can be both birthing, caregiving, and emotional state of childhood or birth, and it can be a case where somebody is being a provider. Some people might even be fathers, and this is where, how should I say that? They may find that they're an excellent provider, and there's something missing, or they, for some other people, they may find that they're a provider, but then they begin to eroticize and need the care that they didn't receive in childhood. Okay, I'm talking about different cases here. Okay, maybe different, maybe the same for different people, but just different settings. And so they may find that they were they were providing caregiving, and then they need to receive caregiving, and then they can eroticize, because there is it's basically a form of misplaced arousal. So this crisis can be with, let's say, rejection, hopefully. Okay, not not okay, met with rejection, and that rejection can denote at, wait a second, what was missing here is actually meeting a non-erotic need, and the eroticism around that, what's underneath, so that the connection to the erotic need can be made without perpetuating a relational trauma around and around that erotic need. Um, for me, Neptune was squaring Chiron. I was in 2012, and I'm trying to think about. It was basically the connection between eroticism and shopping. I was prescribed an antidepressant, and for some people it causes indiscriminate sexual relations, and to me it just causes excessive shopping. And so, in a funny way, it curated my ability to study, which was missing in my life, and the eroticism went to basically excessive shopping, which I was never suffering from. Like, I never had an issue around excessive shopping. Um, so that's basically how it expressed itself. And then only when I got into debt was I given support. And now with the Neptune sextile, I find my emotional needs, my non-erotic emotional needs being met, and being able um, to see what are my erotic needs, and basically to meet the void, okay, to meet what is missing. So for those that are going through the crisis now, Neptune has miraculous ways of healing, and so the crisis is very likely to be around something to do with what was missing in relation, but also facing a certain reject, and that can feel as an emotional rejection. But this emotional rejection can even be, in the best of cases, a refusal, or somebody refuses to cross the threshold of eroticism when they're providing for a non-erotic need. It can also be, if the person is in the provider, that as they try to either cross the threshold or meet the erotic need in an adaptable way, meaning that the non-erotic need was not a child need, but let's say a woman need or a man need, and they go into eroticism, then the threshold can be, oh, wait a second, here are, oh, okay, so that person is so loving, and then when it comes to sex, they have these type of fantasies, and it's like, okay, wait a second, I actually want to relax into. So is it their kink, or is it something emotional that they need to meet? Okay? And this is how the conjoining of Neptune, which is also eroticism and miraculous healing, not just loss and grief and drugs and mafia and secret societies, okay? Or missing things, people, um, or grief, helplessness, and so on. Neptune meets Cancer, which is the moon, and or Cancer Chiron, which is basically a wound around the issues of the moon. Now, there can also be crisis or harmony to do with somebody felt a reject because somebody had certain type of eroticism, and then they were like, no, that was not a reject, it actually meant that you're a part of us. And it's like, but but here is what's missing for me. I am recording. Nee. For example, you've just encountered a crisis around housing and eroticism. Will and consent is so important for real estate. Now, um, More things to say about. So a little bit more about the moon Pluto. Um, Pluto really tends to, if Neptune has a dissolving or dream or creative mist, Pluto has a core issue, addressing the core issue, going into the core issue, the core essence. And with the moon is the core essence of relation. Mars hour. And this is where with Pluto, it's about standing in our power relationally. And this is where the energy reading is about. Somebody may have been trying to receive, how should I say it? They were trying to provide and receive and be seen and show beauty, art, love. It comes from a matrilineage. And again, matrilineage doesn't mean the genitals, okay? Very important. And it came from a desire to be with, and then there was something there where they were delving into a very deep experience, and Pluto can be overwhelming, and then they were seeing certain things, and there could have been with Pluto going to the core issue around power and control that can also be wealth, okay? Moon is also wealth and housing, and how those things interrelate. And I'm feeling, and they could be trying to show something while they themselves have to see something, and the fact that they themselves have to see something doesn't mean that they don't have anything to show. And this is the issue around working with eclipses, okay? Because in eclipse, for example, we could be trying to show something, but we ourselves need to see something, and yet it doesn't mean that what we're trying to show doesn't have merit. And so there's a difficulty to receive that energy for some reason, and I'm getting that it's a Pluto moon. They could be having Pluto going over their moon, Pluto squaring their moon, Pluto conjoining their moon, or even sextiling. And therefore, um, this could create a deep, deep enmeshment. I want you to think about witnessing and embodying, because there was an enmeshment in certain experience that both enmeshed people were trying to dissociate or were dissociating together and not together from. Um, Now there's several energies with this moon Pluto. Certain people are having a moon Pluto um, sextile, and some of them, if they're having it from the Pisces or Aries end, the beginning of Aries, then they have Neptune moon, which is a very curating, but also dreamlike, and I'm the ascendant around these type of moons, so those could be some sort of enmeshment experiences that even I'm not completely aware of, or of how the other person experiences that. Um, and it can be helplessness and reality check around because it's also Saturn, so it's also Sagittarius. Then there can be the moons that are around Pluto now, which is the end of Capricorns and beginning of Aquarius moons, and that would be the conjunction. The beginning Leo, end of Cancer moons are going through the opposition. And the moons at the end of Aries, beginning of Taurus, are going through the square, as well as the moons at the end of Libra, beginning of Scorpio. They're going to a square. The other sextile is, of course, from the end of Scorpio, beginning of Sag. And it can be a really revelation type of energy. Even with the sextiles and the trines, the trine would be end of Taurus, beginning of Gemini, or um, end of Virgo, beginning of Libra. So the trines and the sextiles are still challenging. However, the evolution there is something that, how should I say that? On the good part, there is an agreement, so it's easy to evolve and transform. The challenging part, there is an agreement, so it's challenging to discern, okay, or not, okay? Sometimes by evolving, going into the deep, we evolve and transform naturally, but sometimes it can be that there is an agreement, and we know that when Pluto is harmonious, many times Neptune is not, and vice versa. So that can create the challenge, particularly with the bisextile, aka it's always you tree. So the harder aspects can be um, evolving through a crisis, but it's also the good thing about the hard aspect is that, um, how should I say that? If it is Neptune, then before the Neptune, it's ideation, then reality check, or devaluation, and then coming to be a bit more optimistic in the aftermath. Pluto, again, either power trip and then um, a crisis that leads not to powerlessness, but actually to coming into one's actual power. For example, let's say somebody thinks they have the power to wield over eclipses, and then they can see that it goes very messy and so on, but what was missing is the power to emotionally relate in an adaptable way. And then through that crisis, they can, by authenticity, regain that relational power and self-trust, and then they don't need to try to wield power over eclipses that much, because the overwhelmness of eclipses doesn't throw them off balance in such a fundamental way as it used to before that Pluto transit or Pluto moon transit. It can be also the other way around, but it can mean that it can even be that, for example, they learned the power of moon magic, and they learn how to assess their power or even to stand in their power, and it's actually not through crisis, or that the crisis causes them to learn moon magic. And they use that moon magic not to abuse, and it can even be a crisis of accidentally abusing power and then coming to senses and learning to master the art, so not to harm people, or um, or that they do something and they think, oh my God, it works, and then they see that there was something of an eclipse nature that is not necessarily being allowed. Um, okay, so when it comes to baneful, I'm not talking about baneful as boundary setting, but baneful or malefic magic, um, many times what's being allowed is what's a part of the healing crisis of the person. Um, and when that's not a part of the healing crisis of the person, it might be being allowed because it exposes, for example, that it's funded by classified projects, and the exposure of that is so important on a collective level. Okay, and so the practitioner has to take that into account. Okay, because okay, and that's something to think about. Um, And so when a person has dealt with a certain shadow and that shadow is not theirs to deal with, what is left to expose is basically the funding or the follow the money or the budget, the classified project or the extortion calls, or what's behind that. Um, and that can be, how should I say, either a backfiring or something that's on a collective level changing. Um, it can also be that, um, because Pluto is occultism, so Pluto moon, I'm trying to think about kind of all the options and the arrangements. And definitely Pluto moon is about evolving from certain relational patterns. So particularly there are certain societies where people had to harm their loved ones. And this is about evolving from the emotional patterns to do with that, together with changing the core of these societies. And so this is where in the process of evolution somebody may want to show, and there is the also conscious and not so conscious emotional motives or motivations that one is exposed to upon a Pluto moon transit or synastry. As with the squares, um, again, something of similar nature. Here, both the moon and Pluto have something to say. They don't completely blend and melt into one another. They can, by the way. Um, but both of them have something to say. And there is a friction of growth and purging. Um, and that can, by the way, take some time. Okay, those are relations when the Pluto